What's going on, everybody? It's ShamefulPenguin here, back with another video. Today we're going to be getting into the Forbidden Rite Totem Hierophant guide I made for 3.15 Expedition League. I'm going to be going over all the things I found out about this build. I've been constantly changing it and figuring out like the little tweaks, the little, not necessarily min-maxes, but like what you should use on this build. So the way Forbidden Rite works is that it's an insane skill where you get an absurd amount of base chaos damage, and we're working on scaling that. It gets its base chaos damage from the line deals 12% of your maximum life as base chaos damage. That line alone is where we get pretty much all our damage. You don't really need to level up this gem at all to get an insane amount of damage. You can just really use that and scale everything with that. So since you pretty much deal a bunch of damage to yourself with this, we instead put this on our totems and have our totems do the insane amount of damage to themselves, but also scaling totem life. There are some unique pieces and pieces on the tree that allow us to scale totem life, and this just makes our damage so much better. So we're also using this scaling chaos damage, scaling spell damage, and scaling crit multi and crit chance to just abuse the flat damage that we get in this build to do as much damage as possible. So this build is absolutely tier 1 insane at bossing. I'm not scared to do the Feared or Maven Invitation or anything at all with this build because I know I can complete it with the amount of DPS it pushes out. It is on a little bit of a squishier side, but that's what you get with softcore builds, let's be real. So there are ways to make this a lot tankier you can work on. I have this budget version, budget as in it's like a medium budget. It's around 8 to 10x on this version of the build. I will have PoBs for lower budget and higher budget and medium budget, so you guys pay attention to which one you want to go after. I'll be explaining the key pieces for each part of those builds, so hopefully I kind of check every box that all you guys want to, each one of you guys want to play. And yeah, so Forbidden Rite is insane at bossing, at league starting, at what have it. So the only thing I would say it's not great at is mapping. I wouldn't say it's bad at mapping, but it's not a top tier mapper easily because just how totems work. So keep that in mind when you're making this build. Don't expect like a top tier mapper. Just get ready to do insane single target DPS and pretty much do all content, no worries. So we're going to get into the gearing section now. Gearing is pretty important because there are a decent amount of uniques that enable this build to just be top tier. You can definitely use this build on a budget SSF gear, all rare stuff, if that's what you're choosing to do, and then work up for it. So keep that in mind when you're looking at this build. The first thing we're going to go over is the body armor. Probably the most important thing is the soul mantle. Getting this as soon as possible, even on a 4-link, 5-link, as soon as you can is really important. You will have to match this with either your rings or your helmet or something like that to mitigate the last line where you apply a random hex to yourself when your totem dies. So you're going to have to find a way to mitigate that, but once you find a way to mitigate that, all the benefits of this body armor are insane. The plus number of maximum totems, the totem life, spell damage, even the pseudo 7th link, you get spell totem support automatically on this body armor. So if you don't have to use spell totem support anymore on your build, and it will be an insane build. So body armor, pretty important. Next we're going to get into the boots. The boots are very important actually because it's just like a best in slot unique. You're actually going to want to get Torch Oak Step because it has totem life. Totem life is really hard to beat in terms of DPS, raw DPS. So we take these are pretty much our damage spot, and you can actually get a boot enchant that says you gain like 120% crit chance if you haven't crit recently, and there's actually something weird with that. They might hotfix it or patch it, but technically our totems are critting and not us. So you have that 120% crit chance permanently up on your build. So you can kind of abuse that. So I've been actually farming labs just to maybe get that boot enchant and maybe a good helm enchant and profit craft off that. But as far as boot enchants, you're really going to want to find that if you can. It's a big DPS boost, so farm for that or buy one with it on. It might be expensive. Next, we're going to go over the helmet. Helmet is arguably like one of the most important spots in this build. So we've been this build's been out for a while. There's been a bunch of different guides, and this is kind of like the ultimate guide for me, because like I've come to read all the other guides. I've come to understand the build and all of the testing that Firegrass has done. Thanks to him, we kind of have an understanding of how the projectiles work. And before this, the projectiles you would want to have are like as many as possible you can fit. So you'd use like greater volley, greater multiple projectile, whichever you prefer. You would use just like any projectiles that give you more would do more damage. But now we know that 5 projectiles is the maximum number that will guarantee hit the boss, and any other ones are like pretty bad, have a low chance of hitting the boss. Even if you scale, use like Ink AoE or other AoE scaling skills, you have a really low chance at your 6th and after that projectile hitting the enemy. So we don't really care to get Forbidden Rite fires an additional projectile on our helmet anymore because of that. We don't need the 6th or 7th projectile. So on our helmet, we kind of just want a Viridia's Veil, of course. Pretty expensive. Viridia's Veil makes us curse immune if you have a magic ring in your right slot. So we utilize that. And if you can't afford a Viridia's Veil, you can definitely just get a rare helmet with life and resistance, and that's all you're going to need. And then focus on your rings. We're making sure you are curse immune from your rings, or reduce the effect of curses up to 100% on your rings. So Viridia's Veil is your chase item with a good enchant, as in you can get bonus damage with Forbidden Rite, the 40%. I think that one's just straight up the best one you can get. Unfortunately, the +1 projectiles really doesn't help us. You can get it just to be like flavor pick and just juice your damage and kind of show off. It's definitely the most expensive choice, but it's really not necessary to improve your DPS. It will improve your PoB DPS more, and it will make you look like you're doing more DPS than you are. So keep that in mind. PoB is kind of lying for the DPS after 5 projectiles. Now let's get into the rings. The rings are really important because this is depending on if you are the medium budget or low budget variant. So on the medium budget with Viridia's Veil, you're going to have 1 Essence Worm and 1 Magic Ring on the right hand. Magic Ring is going to be just whatever you need. So I opted for maximum life and some resistance just to finish up my resistance and make sure I'm maxed out. You can definitely opt for other things. You can get like an Assassin's Mark on hit ring or whatever else you want on your magic ring, but I opted for life because we are lacking on life on this build. And then our other slot is going to be the Essence Worm. The Essence Worm is going to slot in a Zealotry, and then we get no reservation from our Zealotry, so we just pretty much are socketing a free big damage aura. So definitely one of our best uses of our ring slot if in terms of DPS. If you are on a lower budget and you do not have a Viridia's Veil, this is what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to have 1 Essence Worm, same thing with the Zealotry, but the other one you're going to want to have a Kikazaru ring. Kikazaru makes it so you have 40% reduced effective curses. So once you have that, you're going to need to spec a few things on your passive tree. You're going to need to spec a Salem and Sanctum of Thought, and on your Pantheon, you're going to need to spec a Varhesh. Varhesh gives you 20% reduced curse effect, and those totaling all together will give you the 100% reduced effective curses, where that's considered curse immune, and you're good. You don't need Viridia's Veil. You just need to make sure you spec all those things instead, and that's on the lower budget. On the lowest end budget, before you're able to get a Divine Vessel and the extra attribute on Soul of Yugol, you're going to need to get 2 Kikazaru rings to make sure you get curse immunity, because you get 80% through 2 Kikazaru rings, and then the last 20% through the Sanctum of Thought node. Next, I'm going to be getting into the belt. So the belt has a few picks, but I'm opting just for a rare belt. I want Stygian Vibes because we can get an Abyssal Socket. An Abyssal Socket, we can get a Abyssal Jewel with some good stats to help us out even more. So rare belt is the safe choice just to round out your resistance, get yourself some good life and mana. The DPS choice on a medium budget is definitely Arn's Anguish. Arn's Anguish turns your endurance charges into brutal charges, and what brutal charges do is it gives you a 3% chance per charge to do triple damage. So that's pretty insane damage scaling. So this is definitely a high-end DPS variant. You are losing some a lot of defensive benefits from your 4 endurance charges. You're instead getting 4 brutal charges, so you're swapping them out. You're going to lose some resistance, you're going to lose some life, you're going to lose all that kind of stuff. So you want to pay attention that if you can fit it in, I would definitely recommend fitting it in, but it's definitely not mandatory. It will boost your DPS quite a bit if you can manage to fit this in. As far as the highest end budget, you are going to want a Coward's Legacy, pretty much a no-brainer. Everyone probably already knows that. You're going to need to spec Pain Attunement on your tree to make sure you're getting 30% more spell damage when you are low life, and that's because the belt actually says that you're cursed with vulnerability and you count as low life while cursed with vulnerability. So you're getting 30% more spell damage, and the more multiplier is insane because more means just like multiplied after all the increases. Next, we're going to go over the weapon. We're going to use a wand. A wand is really strong because you can get a lot of crit chance for spells, spell damage, all that kind of stuff. That's pretty much what we're looking for. The main 3 stats we're looking for are increased crit strike for spells, crit multi, and cast speed. Those are the 3 most important mods that we can look for. The next most important are spell damage and increased chaos damage, and then we're also looking for mana, and mana regen is pretty good on a wand as well. Next, on a weapon, you're definitely going to want +1 a maximum number of summon chaos totems. This is a shaper mod. It's kind of expensive to get, kind of hard to get, but you can find some already crafted ones that are like semi okay for like 1 or 2x. I tried to craft one myself, to be honest, so I'm working on that right now. I'm working on crafting one myself, so it's going to take a little while, but hopefully I end up with a good one. But the +1 maximum number of summoned totems is pretty much impossible to beat as a mod. It is easily your best in slot. It is better than a really well-rolled shield. So if you just get one with +1 and then maybe 1 or 2 good mods on it, you're going to beat a like almost mirror tier shield anyways in terms of this build. So what you're going to want is +1 number, second a number of totems, and then you're also going to want some defenses. So things like life and block are very good for this build. Even energy shield is really strong, and you're going to want some defensive benefits because we don't get defensive benefits from too many other things. Lastly, if you want a more offensive shield or just a few mods on there, you're definitely going to want crit chance for spells, crit multi, and cast speed. You can pretty much copy your wand onto your shield. You can get almost all the same mods at the same tier from your wand to your shield, so try for that if you can. If you can't get the maximum number of summoned totems, so yeah, there you go. Next, we're going to get into the gloves. The gloves are really a flexible spot, so we're going over this like one of the last things. The gloves, you're going to really want life, resistance, and even some dexterity and mana. This is because we are striving and struggling to get some dex, and yeah, so you're going to want to get a little bit of dex either here or your amulet or just wherever you can, but this is the easiest spot to get it because it's really flexible in terms of what you're needing to get on here. And lastly, our amulet. So your amulet, you're really going to want to have strength and dex as the implicit or somewhere else on the amulet just to make sure you're topped off on those stats so we can use all our gems. Then you're also going to want to have life and resistance and make sure you're topped off in your resistance. And then if you want some DPS rules on your amulet, you're definitely want to have crit multi and cast speed on your amulet. Those are definitely some really good DPS benefits on your amulet. You can opt for like +1 level of int gems on a hunter amulet if you have the currency for it, but it's really not as necessary because this build doesn't scale too well off of it, as well off of it. So I would highly recommend focusing on crit multi and cast speed. As far as the anoint, you're going to want to have primal manifestation. This is because we don't go really down to that part of the tree, so we don't want to waste all our travel nodes going there. So primal manifestation is very strong, and you definitely want to take that. If you are, for whatever reason, traveling down there and grabbing primal manifestation, you're going to want to go ahead and grab an anoint called Ironwood instead. It gives us more totem life and resistance and armor per totem, so that is your second best choice. So depending on which one you take, you're definitely taking primal manifestation in all occasions, but if you've already spec'd it on your tree, you're definitely going to go Ironwood. As far as the flasks go, you're going to want to make sure you have a life and a mana flask for this build, because we need the defenses. The mana is just a basically second life pool, so having a mana flask is really helpful to make sure we can sustain that. Quicksilver flask and a diamond flask are pretty much mandatory on most crit builds and just any build for Quicksilver really. And lastly, we're using a Rumi's concoction just to max out our block chance to make sure we are extra defensive, especially while mapping or certain scenarios we can use it while bossing. Really excellent flask we can use. You're going to also want to make sure that you are bleed, corrupting blood immune through your flasks, and freeze immune through your flasks. And also a really helpful thing is ignite immune through your flasks. We take a lot of ignite damage, which is why we've taken anointed flesh and ignite resistance on our tree. But overall, we want to make sure we mitigate any form of ignite. So having ignite removal on your flask is really helpful, just to make sure that you don't degen and die real quick. Now we're going to get into the jewel slots, so let's go over the unique jewels first. First jewel is self-flagellation. So now that we're curse immune, we don't have to worry about curses. So now we're going to take it a step further and get damage from our curses. So we're going to get bonus damage per curse on us. This is a really cheap jewel, really easy to get. You can get this yourself SSF by just corrupting a bunch of Viridian jewels and hopefully landing it. Next is a little more expensive of a jewel depending on the league. Previous leagues it was really cheap. Now it's kind of expensive because this build is really strong. We're going to want Rain of Splinters. So we're going to add 2 projectiles to our Forbidden Rite, and then we're getting 2 projectiles from our volley and then 1 from itself to make ourselves get 5 projectiles, and that's the maximum number of projectiles that you want. So Rain of Splinters is pretty important to get. It helps with DPS. If you're not using Rain of Splinters, you can use a greater multiple projectiles or greater volley until you get this. But Rain of Splinters is very strong because it says reduce damage, totem damage, and not less totem damage. There's a big difference between the two. Reduced totem damage mitigates the increased damage modifiers, those things like increased spell damage, increased chaos damage, all that kind of stuff. We get tons of that on our tree and our items, so it's a lot easier to come by that and mitigate that. If you have something that says less totem damage or less spell damage or less damage in general, that less damage is actually subtracting from the more damage multiplier, and it really hurts your build. So make sure you mitigate and make sure you don't get too many less damage multipliers. So we're getting our less damage multiplier from our volley actually. So that's why we don't want to use greater volley, because it has a bigger less damage multiplier and mitigate our damage more. So yeah, that's just a quick explanation. Hopefully you guys understood that. Any more questions, you guys can definitely ask me down in the comments below if you're confused about that, how that works. Next, we're going to be getting into the jewels, the rare jewels. The rare jewels are pretty easy to come by, honestly. They're really easy to craft, so you don't need to buy them. But they're pretty cheap because they're easy to craft, so it goes 2 ways. So I'm going to be recommending to use Viridian jewels for all your crafting and all your jewels. Obviously you can use whatever jewel you get, but the main stats you're going to want are maximum life and increased totem life. Those are the 2 best mods you can get on a jewel, and they're actually really easy to get on a Viridian jewel, because the only 2 mods on a jewel that you can roll that have the life mod are those mods. On Cobalt jewels or Crimson jewels, you have things like minion life and other forms of life, so that you can't craft that as hard. So what you're going to go with is if you land any harvest and you see anything that says reroll a rare item with increased chance of rare mods and stuff like that, you want to throw in your Viridian Jewels and hope you get totem life and increased totem life and maximum life. You're definitely going to get one of them for sure, guaranteed, but the odds of you getting two are not like super high, but like it's a lot higher than any other form of crafting. So you're just going to hope you get that. And then other mods you're going to want along with those two are crit multi, some cast speed, or if you need resistance on your, if you're not resistance capped on this build, you're definitely going to want to have some resistance somewhere. As far as the cluster jewels go, you're going to want to make sure you have one large cluster jewel and two medium cluster jewels. So the large cluster jewel, you're going to want to have a 8 passive large cluster jewel that does chaos damage. If you want to just save a little bit of money and not like min-max it as hard, you can definitely go for a spell damage 8 passive, and they're a lot cheaper, and then get some mods on that and just call it a day. But as far as the chaos damage, that's the best one we can get. You're going to want to have Dark Ideation, Unholy Grace, and Unwaveringly Evil. Those are the 3 best mods you can get on the chaos damage one, just to improve our DPS. And honestly, large cluster jewels aren't as important. The main thing we want to talk about is the medium cluster jewels. The medium cluster jewels, you're going to want to have Ancestral Preservation on a 4 or 5 passive totem damage jewel. Ancestral Preservation is the important mod we're looking for. It has increased totem life, which is already amazing, and then chaos resistance for our totems, so they don't kill themselves when they constantly cast. We're not losing any DPS from them being chaos resist, and they're just doing a ton of damage without like only getting a few casts off. So this is really important for just like keeping out the totems for a long period of time. So Ancestral Preservation on each jewel. So you're going to want to have 2 jewels with Ancestral Preservation, and then you're going to want to have one with Sleepless Sentries. This gives us permanent pretty much onslaught because we are always casting totems, so we get onslaught when we summon a totem. So that's really good. And lastly, you're going to want the other one with Ancestral Echo because this gives us attack and cast speed, and cast speed is one of the best ways to scale DPS on this build, so you definitely want cast speed wherever you can get it. So we're going to go over the gem links first. So the first one, most important, is of course Forbidden Rite. Our Forbidden Rite totem support is going to have Forbidden Rite, and we have a Soul Mantle on, so we already have a Spell Totem support. But if you are not using a Soul Mantle, make sure you slot in a Spell Totem support as your first link. Anyways, your links are going to look like this. Void Manipulation and Volley for good damage scaling and our additional projectiles. Then you're going to want to have as your 4th link increased critical strikes just to improve our crit, increased critical damage support, and then faster casting as your 6th link. Faster casting, I believe, is the superior 6th link over cruelty because faster casting just makes the smooth and easiness of this build a lot better, because just it casts more often, so you can get out more projectile, so it clears a little better, and then it really, you're doing just as much boss DPS. You're doing so much boss DPS that like the difference isn't really noticed. I've never really noticed the difference, so faster casting is your definite 6th link. Next, we're going to have a Wither Totem support. So we're not using multiple totem on our Forbidden Rite, if you noticed, so we only cast 5 Forbidden Rite totems. And Wither, we're actually using multiple totem, Spell Totem, and faster casting. And this is because Wither, we can have a maximum of 7 Wither totems, and there's a difference of 2, obviously. So you can summon all of your Wither totems and then summon as many Spell Totems as you can, as many Forbidden Rite totems, and you'll always have 2 Wither totems left over. So this is something that we abuse to keep Wither active as much as possible. So Wither is really important to have up as much as possible because it is a huge damage increase for our build. So keeping up Wither is really important. Self-casting is pretty awful, even though you get the infused channeling bonus and then you can get multiple totems, so you do a little bit more damage with Forbidden Rite. It's not worth the fact that you still have to self-cast. So definitely use multiple totem Wither support and then Forbidden Rite without it. So that is the superior setup. Next, we're going to get into our defensive setup. We have a cast when damage taken, Tempest Shield, Steel Skins setup. So this is just an extra layer of defense so we don't die, and we get a little more block chance on average. And then we use increased duration as well, just to make sure the uptime on both Steel Skin and Tempest Shield are longer. Now we're going to get into our movement supports. So we have two forms of movement. We have our Flame Dash, Arcane Surge, Faster Casting, pretty self-explanatory. We attach Faster Casting and Arcane Surge so we can get our Arcane Surge proc to go and Flame Dash faster. Then we got our Shield Charge as well, where this just makes mapping that much faster, and then we can actually tag Fortify on enemies just to make ourselves a little more defensive. This is a setup that I've actually been preferring lately, so I highly recommend you guys try it out. It makes the build a lot faster during maps and getting around. And lastly, we have our kind of random setup. So we have our Assassin's Mark, where that's the superior curse we're using. It is better than Despair because of the amount of wither we have on our enemy. We have Vol Haste, and we don't use the regular haste, we only use Vol Haste. You can swap this out for a Vol Righteous Fire instead. In terms of DPS, it's pretty close, and I like the use of Vol Haste just to spam it whenever I want to. And you're going to attach an increased duration to that, just to make it so Vol Haste lasts longer, and even Assassin's Mark lasts longer with an increased duration. And lastly, you don't need this link to anything. You're just going to have a clarity. Highest level you can get this. This is for our good mana regen, because we are Mind Over Matter, so you want as much mana regen as you can get. Lastly, we have a Zealotry. This is on our Essence Worm, so it casts no mana. Keep the aura on ourselves, and just gives us a big damage boost. That's all you want it for. As far as the passive tree goes, there's multiple passive trees, so make sure you check the PoB for which variation you're using. If you are not using a Viridian's Veil, this is what your passive tree is going to look like. You're going to want to make sure you have Sanctum of Thought spec'd and Asylum, so you can get that reduce effective curses, as well as Soul of Yugal with the Varish Divine Vessel thing finished on it, so you can make sure you're immune to curses. And this is pretty much what your passive tree is going to look like. Make sure you go into the PoB to check out all the little things. And if you need any info on how to level this build, make sure you check out my Leveling with Penguin series. I have a PoB down there where it's the leveling tree that I leveled with from pretty much 1 to 60 something, whatever I finished the game with, through all the acts. So it gives you the order of Ascendency, the order of how I spec the tree, and some items that you can try to get for SSF. Anyways, so this is what the tree is going to look like for Kikazaru and no Viridian's Veil. And if you have a Viridian's Veil, this is what your tree is going to look like. It's pretty similar. So you pretty much save 7 passive points by not specking into the curse immunity. So you find 7 points to spec that into. There's 2 places that I would prefer to pick them. My favorite is using Sanctuary, just to make sure you are elemental res capped and you get a bunch of block. This is very strong to use, in my opinion. I think it's the best choice because we do have enough damage, so I think getting more defense is the way to go. But if you are opting to get more offense, you can definitely spec into Throat Seeker and travel all the way over here. This is exactly 7 points to travel, so you can get Throat Seeker. You can travel over here and get Nimbleness and prepare to get Pain Attunement and get a Cluster Jewel, so you can grab Nimbleness and a Jewel spot. Or you can just finish out some of your life if you haven't finished up life in all of the little spots, and then grab Precision for more cast speed. So there's a few options you can opt to go with on your build, but I think getting more defensive is the prime way. Lastly, if you have a Coward's Legacy, you're going to want to make sure you spec into Pain Attunement right over here, because making sure you have this spec for Coward's Legacy is like, if you don't have this spec when you're using a Coward's Legacy, there's no reason that you're using it. So huge damage boost if you can manage to spec this, and then you have Nimbleness right next to you that you can also spec in order to boost your DPS even further. So make sure you have these spec'd when you're using that. Now we're going to get into our Ascendancy choices. Our first Ascendancy choice is going to be Pursuit of Faith. This gives us an extra totem, and that's just amazing in DPS. This is like the prime reason we take our this Ascendency is for the additional totem. Next, we're going to take a Ritual Awakening because it is very strong. It gives us 5% more damage per summoned totem. So we get up to summon 7 totems, so that's 35% more damage, and that's just pretty insane. That's almost a link's worth of DPS. That's more than a link's worth of DPS in some cases now. So we also get some mana regen, and our totems get life regen from this, so it's a very strong Ascendency. Third, we're going to be taking Conviction of Power because we get +4 to max minimum endurance charges and power charges, so that means that we always have 4 endurance and power charges on ourselves at all times. Endurance charges gives us some defensive benefits and all res, and power charges just give us a ton of extra crit, so you can utilize that pretty well on this build. Lastly, we use Divine Guidance. This gives us 10% of damage is taken from mana before life, so it stacks on top of our Mind Over Matter, which is 30%, so now we take 40% of damage taken as mana, so it makes us a lot more defensive. It gives us Transfiguration of Mind, which makes increases and reductions to max mana applied damage at 30% of their value. So this just makes it so if you get 100% more mana or increased mana, you get 30% increased damage. So pretty strong because we are scaling mana pretty well on this build, so that we get a bunch of extra damage for free. Now I'm going to get into the Pantheon. Usually I'd say get whatever you want, whatever you think fits best with your build. But in this case, you're definitely going to want to take Yugal if you do not have a Viridi's Veil. Using the Varhesh to get reduced curse effect on you, and making sure you have full curse reduction, 100% reduce effective curses from your build is very important. If you have a Viridi's Veil, ignore that. You can use whatever minor god that you feel like, but Yugal is definitely mandatory on the non-Viridi's Veil version. For the major god, you're going to want to have Rhine King, in my opinion, is the best because we do get stunned quite a bit on this build, and getting our stun and block recovery and all that other stuff is actually pretty beneficial on this build. But if you're not worried about getting stun locked too often, which I was actually getting stun locked pretty often, the next best choice is Lunaris, in my opinion, just because Lunaris is like, you want movement speed and avoid and all that stuff is really strong. So if you're getting stun locked a lot, Rhine King's the choice. If not, Lunaris is your Pantheon. As far as the bandits go, you want to kill all so we can get those extra passive points. Passive points are really hard to pass up on this build, especially because we are really needing extra. We use as many passive points as we can get, so it is better than killing or helping Alira in this case for this build. That's all I had for this video. Thank you guys so much for checking it out. There is a lot of things to go on with this build, but if you guys haven't tried it or are on the edge of trying it, make sure you use it this league. Like, honestly, this build is so strong, and it's gonna be nerfed next league. So if you're like, oh, I'll try it next league, just try it now. Just trust me, it's gonna get nerfed. It is way too strong. So I hope you guys enjoyed my build guide for this. I know that it took a while to get this out. I've been playing this build for like maybe 2 weeks now. I wanted to get this build guide out last week, but I actually had a lot of finishing touches on this things I've been working on this build, and I haven't had as much time, so it took longer to get this build guide out than I really wanted to. So I hope you guys enjoy it, even though it's more delayed, and I hope you guys enjoyed the different editing style that I've taken with this. I know I did this on a previous build guide video, but if you guys are enjoying this type of build guide, please let me know down in the comments down below, and I'll do this more often. If not, if you like the old way I did the build videos, let me know as well, and I'll consider what I should do in the future depending on the build guide. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions about this build. I'm definitely free to answer any question you have on this build, because I always forget to explain things. I spend too much time. This video is already way too long, and because I try to explain more than other build guides. A lot of build guides just slap gear in your face and then they don't explain why they use them, and I try my best to explain them without taking way too much time and like wasting your guys' time on the video. But I know I forget things. I know I explain things too much sometimes, it's a hard to find a balance. Trust me. I've been if I found the perfect balance, I'd be making those videos. So let me know down in the comments if I didn't explain something enough, and if you guys want me to, I can just if you're still confused, I will answer your question definitely. And if there is so many questions that I'll make a new video, I'll make an update video where I answer just questions for sure if there's a lot of questions that I feel like need to be answered. So thank you guys so much for the support. I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.